Before we ride, come closer and let me place you inside the saddle with me, because this is not the kind of story you watch from a safe distance. It is the kind you smell. It smells like camel sweat and oiled leather, like crushed cumin in a merchant's pouch, like cold stone inside a caravanserai after midnight. It sounds like bells on 100 necks, like the low prayers of tired men, like wind dragging sand across a tent wall until it feels as if the desert itself is trying to get in. If I had been a caravan guard on the Silk Road, you would not remember me for a single heroic duel or a clean victory. You would remember me for the discipline of long distance, the mathematics of risk, the politics of borders, and the quiet violence of nature. You would remember the way a mountain pass can kill without lifting a blade, and the way a rumor can close a city gate faster than an army. The Silk Road was never one road. It was a living network of arteries. Some routes braided north around the Taklamakan Desert. Some cut south along the edge of it. Some climbed into the Pamirs like a prayer offered to thin air. The road was whatever remained possible after weather, war, tolls, and fear took their share. And our caravan moved along those shifting possibilities the way water finds its way through stone. So listen as if you are walking behind me at dusk. I will tell you what I saw, what I measured, what I feared, and what I learned to respect. I will speak to you like you are there, because that is the only honest way to tell this. And now, before we begin the ride, if you're not subscribed to my YouTube channel yet, please subscribe and like this video. It truly helps me keep making stories like this, and I need your support to bring you the next journey. Chapter 1, The Ledger of Danger. If you had met me at the start, you might have mistaken my job for something simple. A weapon at my side, a stern face, and a promise to stand between cargo and trouble. But guarding a caravan is closer to being an accountant of danger. Every day, I balanced losses we could survive against losses that would end us. You would have seen it the first morning we formed up outside the city walls, when the merchants argued about pace and order. Caravans are not crowds, they are machines. The camels and horses are the gears, the drivers are the hands, the merchants are the money, and the guards are the teeth that bite back when something tries to break the machine. I would have walked the line and read the cargo without touching it. Cloth bales wrapped in oilskin, ceramics packed in straw, paper sealed against damp, small boxes that merchants pretended were ordinary because they were valuable, dyes, medicines, gems, and letters. Letters can be worth more than spice. A letter can start a war or stop one, and people kill for them quietly. Then I would have checked men, not their courage, their habits. Who drinks too early? Who boasts? Who stares at the loads like he is already spending them? Bandits do not always come from outside. Sometimes they grow inside, fed by hunger and resentment and the belief that the desert has no witnesses. If you were beside me, I would have taught you the first rule. Distance is protection, but only if you can move. A caravan that cannot move is a siege waiting to happen. That is why we carried spare harness, spare rope, needles for stitching torn packs, and resin for sealing cracked leather. I cared about such things as much as I cared about arrows. Our route in that season ran from the east toward the heartlands of Central Asia, aiming for the rich cities where money moved like water through canals. We had choices, but choices were illusions. The desert and the mountains narrowed them. You could go north and risk steppe raiders, or go south and risk thirst, or cut through a pass and risk snow that falls without warning. Merchants like to argue about profit. Guards argue about survival. The land taught you fast. The first days were wide plains fading into harsher earth, the kind that does not forgive poor planning. You would have noticed how we traveled early, rested when the sun turned cruel, then traveled again as evening cooled the air. That rhythm was not tradition, it was engineering. Animals collapse when heat climbs into their lungs. Men grow stupid when their mouths dry. At night, I would have placed you where I place myself, not at the fire's center, but at its edge. Fires are comfort, but comfort makes you careless. And you never sleep like a citizen sleeping behind walls. You sleep like a listener, half dreaming, waiting for the small changes in sound that mean danger is approaching. The road offered its own warnings. You learned to read tracks the way scholars read ink. A line of hoof prints too neat can mean a patrol. Hoof prints scattered and circling can mean scouts. Footprints with no pack animal prints can mean men traveling light, which can mean bandits. One evening, we found a message without words. A dead camel, gutted and left beside the route, its bell still tied to the neck. That is not hunger. That is a sign. Someone wanted us to feel watched. I did not let the merchants pretend it was nothing. I ordered the caravan into tighter formation, and I doubled the night watch. You would have seen the change in how men breathed. Fear spreads like cold. Some men talk too much. Some go silent. The merchants began counting their bales more often, as if counting could ward off loss. This is where documentary truth lives. Most violence never announces itself with trumpets. It arrives as tension in the shoulders, as shortened tempers, as a guard who stops joking. 2 nights later, the trouble came, not as a grand battle, but as an attempt to peel us apart. That is how bandits work. They do not want your whole caravan. They want the weak edge, the last string of camels, the tired driver who let his knot loosen. They struck at the rear just before dawn. You would have heard it first as shouting, then the sharp sound of a camel going down, then the clang of metal when a blade meets a spear shaft. In the dark, shapes become lies. So I did what a guard must do. I made the dark honest. I ordered torches lit and thrown outward, not held close. Light behind you makes you blind. Light in front of you makes your enemy visible. Then I ran to the rear with 2 men, moving fast, but not alone, never alone. A single guard can be dragged off silently. The attackers were not an army. They were a dozen men, maybe 15, clothed to blend into dust, armed with short bows and curved knives. They were disciplined enough to aim for drivers, not guards. Kill the driver, panic the animals, the load becomes chaos. Chaos is theft's best ally. We held the line by refusing to chase. This is another lesson I would have given you. Chasing into darkness is how you die. We formed a wall around the fallen camel and the nearest. Loads, shields angled, spears forward. We made them pay for every step closer. An arrow struck one of our men in the shoulder. He did not scream. He made a noise like someone surprised. Then he kept his feet because he knew if he fell, others might follow. Courage in the caravan is often quiet like that. When the bandits realized we would not break formation, they took what they could from the fallen animal, cut a strap, grabbed a pouch, and vanished the way dust vanishes when wind changes. It was not victory, not defeat. It was the road's tax. Afterward, you would have expected celebration. There was none. We did inventory. We checked wounds. We reinforced knots. We moved, because standing still invites the next strike. That morning, as the sun rose over a plain that looked empty and innocent, I would have told you something that sounds bleak, but is practical. The road is not a line on a map. It is a negotiation you conduct every hour with weather, with men, with hunger, with rumor, and with the fact that someone is always watching for the moment you become tired. Chapter 2. The Desert That Eats Maps. If you were with me when we reached the edge of the great desert routes, you would have understood why people speak of the Taklamakan and its cousins with a kind of religious caution. Deserts do not simply lack water, they remove certainty. A city can be cruel, but it is predictable. The desert is honest in a different way. It tells you directly, you do not belong here, and if you pretend otherwise, you will be corrected. We planned desert crossings like military operations. You would have watched us measure water not by thirst but by distance, animals, and contingency. We carried water skins in layers, some accessible, some sealed and reserved. The merchants hated that. They wanted the water for comfort. But comfort is not survival. Survival is discipline. We traveled from oasis to oasis, and you would have learned that an oasis is not a paradise. It is a bargaining table. Everyone needs it. Therefore, everyone fights over it, sometimes with blades, sometimes with prices, sometimes with politics. At one oasis settlement, the local headman demanded a toll that was twice what the merchants expected. The merchants complained, as merchants do, as if indignation could replace leverage. I did not argue about fairness. Fairness is not a desert concept. I argued about consequences. We paid part of the toll in coin and part in goods that would not threaten the headman's status. Fine cloth is safer than weapons. Spices are safer than gold. Gold makes men think they can buy power. Spices make men think they can buy pleasure. Pleasure is less dangerous. If you had stood beside me, you would have noticed the guards of that settlement. Their weapons were worn, not ceremonial. Their eyes scanned our loads like hungry dogs. Those are men who have learned that caravans are the only flowing river in a dry land. They will drink from it whenever they can. Then we pushed on, hugging the edges where the desert meets broken ground, because total emptiness is how you vanish without witnesses. The route was marked by things that are not meant to be beautiful, but become beautiful anyway. Prayer flags on a pole, a cairn of stones, a bleached skull turned sideways by wind. The skull is also a marker. It says, others died here. You might too. Sandstorms are the desert's wars. They do not care who you are. When the first storm hit us, it arrived as a line on the horizon, a darker smear against the pale sky. Then the wind rose like a living thing. The air filled with sand so fine it found the seams in your clothing and the corners of your eyes. You do not fight a sandstorm. You endure it correctly. We dropped the loads, turned animals inward, and made the caravan into a tight circle like a hedgehog. Drivers covered the camels' faces. I ordered everyone to tie themselves to ropes connected to the main loads. It sounds humiliating until you see a man stand up in a storm and take 3 steps, then vanish because he cannot see his own hands. For hours, we existed inside a moving wall of grit. The sound is what stays with you, a constant scraping, like the world is being filed down. When it passed, the desert had rewritten our tracks and half buried our supplies. We dug out what we could. We counted water again. We checked animals for sand in the nostrils. A camel can suffocate slowly. and you would not notice until it drops. And then comes the most documentary truth of all. After a storm, the caravan is weaker, men are tired, animals are stressed, loads shift, and predators, human and otherwise, know this. On the third day after the storm, we found the remains of another caravan. Broken pottery, a torn banner, a single sandal, and wheel ruts disappearing into dunes. No bodies. That meant one of two things. Either they escaped and stripped their own loads to move faster, or someone else stripped them. We reached a caravanserai that evening, a stone fort in the emptiness. And if you have never seen one, imagine a square of thick walls with a single heavy gate, built not for comfort, but for denial. Denial of bandits, denial of weather, denial of the desert's desire to swallow you. Inside, the air smelled of animals and smoke and human fatigue. Merchants immediately became social creatures again. They traded rumors the way they traded goods. One said a warlord had taken a city on the western route. Another said a tax collector had been hanged in a market as a warning. Someone else whispered about Mongol scouts far to the north, moving like winter. As a guard, you treat rumors like maps drawn on water. But you still listen, because sometimes a rumor is the first edge of a blade. That night, violence came inside the walls, not from outside attackers, but from desperation and suspicion. A merchant accused another of stealing a pouch of gemstones. Voices rose, men gathered, hands moved to knives. I stepped between them before pride turned into blood. I did not threaten, I described reality. If we cut each other inside a caravanserai, we do the bandits' work for them. If we split the caravan over an argument, the desert will collect the pieces. We searched packs under agreed rules, with witnesses with faces that tried not to show hatred. We found nothing. Maybe the gemstones were never there. Maybe they were hidden. But the search itself mattered. It restored a fragile order. If you were with me, you would have seen the deeper lesson. A caravan is a temporary society. It needs law, even if the law is only what we can enforce with words and the promise of shared survival. The next morning, we left at first light. The stone walls behind us shrank until they were just another shape on the horizon, and the desert returned to its endless, indifferent quiet. You would have understood then why guards sometimes pray, even if they do not believe. Prayer is a way of admitting that control is limited, and that admission keeps you careful. Chapter 3. Mountains, passes, and men who claim them. The Silk Road does not only cross emptiness, it climbs into stone. And stone is a different kind of enemy. Where the desert erases your path, the mountains narrow it until a handful of men can stop 1,000. When we approached the mountain corridors toward the great Central Asian cities, the air changed. It grew thinner, cleaner, and sharper. You could taste cold in the mornings. The animals' breath showed as white clouds. We traded some camels for hardier horses and yaks where we could, because the wrong animal in the wrong terrain is not an inconvenience. It is death. You would have seen the passes as scars in the earth. Narrow routes with cliffs on one side and drops on the other. Places where one landslide can close a road for weeks. Places where a single arrow from above can ruin your day, your caravan, your life. Here, politics becomes geography. Every pass has an owner, or at least someone who claims to own it. A local lord, a tribal chief, a garrison captain. They all speak the language of protection while holding out their hands for tolls. At one choke point, we met a fortified post. A small stone tower with a gate and men in layered coats, their faces weathered by altitude. They were not bandits. They were worse in a way because they were legitimate. Legitimacy gives greed a uniform. Their captain demanded payment per animal, per load, per wheel, as if he had invented the road. The merchants protested. I watched the captain's men. Their bows were strung. Their fingers rested near arrow nocks. This negotiation could turn into a massacre if someone lost control. So I did what a guard sometimes must do. I lied politely. I spoke of our caravan as if it were attached to powerful patrons in far cities. I used names that carried weight, not because those patrons would come save us, but because power is often a story people fear to challenge. It worked enough to lower the toll. We paid, we passed, and we did not die. That is what success looks like on the road, not triumph, but continuation. The mountains gave us beauty like a weapon. You would have seen valleys where rivers cut silver lines through dark earth, and peaks that looked close enough to touch but were still days away. You would have seen eagles circling, not out of poetry, but out of hunger. And then you would have seen war's shadow, even where no battle was visible, burned villages, a bridge broken and not repaired, refugees walking with bundles tied to sticks, their eyes fixed on nothing. When a region is unstable, it leaks people. We entered a market town where the stalls were half full and the faces were tight with fear. Soldiers had passed through recently, and where soldiers pass, they consume. Grain, animals, patience. A child watched us with the blank stare of someone too familiar with violence. That night, as we camped near a river, scouts came, not our scouts. Riders from a local faction, their horses small and tough, their weapons practical. They claimed we were on their territory and demanded a gift for safe passage. This was not a toll booth with paperwork. This was extortion dressed as tradition. And here, the guard's job becomes the edge between submission and slaughter. If you were with me, you would have watched the line form, guards forward, merchants behind. No one drew first. Drawing first is a kind of confession. But everyone's hand moved closer to steal. I spoke to their leader calmly. Calm is a tool. I told him we were not prey, but we were not looking for war either. I offered a controlled payment, enough to satisfy pride, not enough to invite repeat attacks. A few bolts of cloth, some salt, a small pouch of coins. I made it seem like generosity rather than fear. He hesitated because he wanted more. Greed always wants more, but greed also calculates. He saw our formation. He saw we had discipline. He saw we were not drunk, not panicked, not scattered. He took the offer and left, but not before warning us of bandits ahead, meaning other men like him. That is how instability works. Everyone claims to protect you from someone else while taking their share. The true battle came 2 days later in a narrow ravine where the road tightened between rock walls and the sky became a thin strip overhead. You would have felt it before it happened, the way sound changes in a confined space, the way animals grow restless, the way even experienced men speak less. An ambush, there is a classic problem. Attackers above, rocks rolled down, arrows raining, panic below. We had prepared for this. We placed our best archers watching the heights. We moved in staggered groups rather than a single long snake. We kept the loads tight. When the first stones came, we heard them before we saw them, a rumbling like distant thunder that suddenly becomes immediate. One boulder hit the path ahead and shattered, spraying fragments. A mule screamed, another slipped, and nearly took its load over the edge. Then arrows. Short, heavy arrows designed for close work. One struck a driver in the thigh. He went down hard. Blood in a ravine looks darker, as if the stone drinks it. I ordered the front to push forward to clear the kill zone. In an ambush, stopping is death. The rear formed a shield wall, moving step by step, protecting the most vulnerable loads. Our archers fired upward at shadows, not expecting to kill as much as to force heads down. We could not climb to them, not quickly. That is another documentary truth. The best position is not always reachable. So we did the next best thing. We denied them time. The caravan moved like a wounded animal that refuses to fall. Slow, ugly, stubborn. The attackers expected panic. They got discipline. As we cleared the ravine, a small group of attackers tried to rush down to seize a dropped bale. That was their mistake. They came into our level, into spear range, into the place where numbers matter. We met them with controlled violence. No shouting heroics. Just thrusts, blocks, and the brutal simple fact that armor and training beat desperation when desperation loses surprise. They retreated. We did not chase far. Again, do not chase into terrain you do not control. We gathered the wounded, we salvaged what we could, and we moved on with the kind of silence that follows near death. That evening, while the merchants wrapped their fears in complaints about profit, I sat with the injured driver and held his hand steady while we cleaned the wound. Guarding is not only fighting, it is keeping the human machine functional. If you were with me, you would have understood then that the Silk Road is not romantic. It is logistical, it is political, it is bodily. It is the constant conversion of danger into distance traveled. Chapter 4. Cities of Trade, Cities of Spies, and the Long Way Home. After weeks of emptiness and stone, a great trade city hits you like a change in climate. You smell it before you see it. Cooking smoke, tanned hides, sewage, perfume, horses. You hear it. Metal hammered, languages colliding, prayers, arguments, laughter that sounds too loud after the road's quiet. When we reached one of the famed crossroad cities of Central Asia, the caravan did not simply arrive. It was absorbed. The city took us apart like a merchant untying knots. Loads went to warehouses, animals went to stables, men went to bathhouses, tea houses, mosques, taverns, courtyards, anywhere their exhaustion could soften. But the guard's work does not end at the gate. In some ways, it becomes harder. On the road, threats are visible. Riders, storms, cliffs. In cities, threats wear clean robes and smile. If you had walked with me through the bazaar, you would have seen how trade is intelligence. Merchants ask questions the way spies ask questions. Which roads are open? Which lord is taxing harder? Which army is marching? Which coins are being clipped? Who was executed last week and why? Caravans carry goods, yes, but they also carry information, and information is often more valuable than silk. In the caravan district, I would have shown you the infrastructure that makes the Silk Road possible. Caravanserais spaced like stepping stones. Money changers who recognize foreign coin by sound. Scribes who write contracts in multiple scripts. Interpreters who speak 3 languages and belong nowhere, which is exactly why they are useful. You would have met other guards too. Men with scars in different patterns, step cuts, desert burns, frostbite on fingertips. We talked in the shorthand of professionals. Not, have you seen adventure, but how are the roads? What are the tolls? Which tribe is restless? Which pass is closed? and you would have learned a final sobering truth. War is always nearby, even when you do not see it. It sits in the price of grain, in the number of beggars, in the nervousness of gate guards, in the sudden popularity of weapons in the market. We heard of armies moving on distant frontiers, of cities changing hands, of rulers issuing new taxes to fund campaigns. That meant our return route could not be the same as our outward route. The road behind you is never guaranteed. Before we left the city, I inspected a new set of loads. Some goods had been sold and replaced with others more profitable for the West. Dyed cloth, metalwork, dried fruits, perhaps glassware, perhaps carefully sealed medicines. The merchants' eyes were brighter now. They had tasted success. Success makes people reckless. I had to counterbalance that. I tightened rules. No wandering alone. No drinking before a night watch. No arguments with locals. Cities have laws, but the law is not always on the traveler's side. Then we departed, following routes that bent toward the west, toward land, where mountains soften into plateaus and the air carries different scents. You would have felt the cultural shift in small details, the cut of clothing, the style of prayer, the architecture of roadside inns, the types of bread offered at a stop. On one stretch, we traveled through rolling terrain where winter threatened early. The sky flattened into a lid of gray, roads turned to mud, wheels sank, animals slipped. This is when you understand that not all hardship is dramatic. Sometimes hardship is simply slow. We reached a fortress town that controlled a key crossing, and we found the gates tense. A conflict had recently flared between local forces and a rival faction. No one trusted outsiders. The guard captain at the gate studied us as if we were a disease. Here, diplomacy is survival. I presented our caravan as neutral, trade-focused, passing through. I offered small gifts that were socially acceptable. Salt, cloth, a few coins. I avoided anything that could be interpreted as bribery in a way that offended pride. Pride is another form of weapon. Inside, we kept to ourselves. We left before dawn. That is how you move through unstable places, quietly, quickly, respectfully. The final major threat was not a bandit ambush or a toll dispute. It was winter itself. In higher ground, snow came early, and it came like a closing door. Passes that were difficult became deadly. Rivers that were crossings became barriers. You would have watched us make the hard choice. Abandon some low-value cargo to save animals and people. Merchants hate that choice. But the road does not care about profit. The road cares about physics. We lightened loads. We redistributed essentials. We made sure every man had enough layers, enough food, enough fuel for small fires when we dared to burn them. We moved in tighter units. We watched for signs of frostbite, because frostbite is silent until it is too late. And then at last, the land began to open. The hardest passes fell behind us. The air grew less thin. Markets began to look familiar again. The caravan's gait changed. The animals sensed homeward momentum the way humans do. If you had stayed with me to the end, you would have expected me to feel triumphant. But what I felt was something more grounded. Respect. Respect for the fragile engineering that makes long-distance trade possible. Respect for the ordinary men who carry extraordinary burdens. Respect for the fact that the Silk Road is not held together by romance, but by routine, by negotiation, and by the constant stubborn decision to keep moving. And I would have told you sincerely that being a caravan guard changes your sense of the world. You stop thinking of distance as empty space. You think of it as a chain of risks and resources. You stop thinking of borders as lines. You think of them as people with demands. You stop thinking of cities as destinations. You think of them as temporary shelters where danger changes its clothing. Most of all, you learn that every safe arrival is built from 1,000 small choices made correctly. That is what I saw. That is what I lived. And if you can hear the bells in your mind right now, then you were there with me. And before we end, one last reminder. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Your support is what allows me to continue. And if you want the next chapter of the road, I truly need you with me.